It all started with a phone call I wish I'd ignored. "Come out to the farm, Jake," Kyle said. "I found something in the north shed, and I need someone else to see it." Kyle was one of those guys who always had some story or scheme. Lost treasure buried under the barn, alien signals on his shortwave radio. He was the type who'd pull you into his delusions until you didn't know which way was up. I didn't have time for his nonsense, but he sounded off this time. Like really off. "I mean it, man," he whispered. "You've got to come tonight. Bring a flashlight. Just trust me." I figured if I didn't go, he'd hound me for weeks. So I threw my boots in the truck, grabbed my flashlight, and headed out to his farm. It was a sprawling plot, mostly flat fields broken up by patches of trees and old, weathered outbuildings. You know the type. A few silos, a rusted tractor left to rot in the weeds, and a house that looked like it'd collapse in the next storm. When I pulled up, Kyle was standing in the driveway. He looked pale under the porch light, his face drawn tight like he hadn't slept in days. "You okay?" I asked, stepping out of the truck. He just shook his head. "I'm not crazy. You'll see." He wouldn't say more, just led me across the yard toward the north shed. It was a squat, unassuming building with peeling red paint and a padlock on the door. But when Kyle pushed the door open, I felt it. A wave of cold air that didn't belong. Inside, the shed was pitch black. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, catching dust motes and old tools hanging from the walls. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just junk. A broken plow, some buckets, a few jars of nails. But then Kyle pointed to the far corner. "There," he whispered. The beam landed on a trapdoor. It was small, barely big enough for someone to crawl through, and the edges were lined with scratches. Deep, jagged scratches, like something had been clawing its way out. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. Kyle didn't answer. He just crouched next to the trapdoor and pried it open. The hinges screamed in protest, revealing a narrow tunnel that descended into the earth. The air that wafted up was damp and smelled faintly of decay. "I heard something," Kyle said, his voice trembling. "It was moving down there, scraping around. I thought it was raccoons or something, but then I saw this." He held up his phone, showing me a video. It was shaky, filmed in the dark, but I could make out the trapdoor and a shadow moving just beyond the light. It wasn't a raccoon. It was too big, too misshapen. And the way it moved, crawling and jerking like its limbs didn't quite work right, sent a chill through me. "You're messing with me," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Kyle shook his head. "Go down there if you don't believe me." I wanted to tell Kyle to shove it, slam the shed door, and never look back. But the way he was staring at me, eyes wide and glinting with a mix of fear and desperation, I knew he wouldn't let me leave without at least peeking into that hole. "Fine," I muttered. "But if this is some elaborate prank, I'm driving home and leaving you here." Kyle handed me a rope and a flashlight. "I'm not screwing with you, Jake. Just be careful. Be careful." Great. The trapdoor wasn't much wider than my shoulders, and as I swung my legs over the edge, the sour, damp air below made me gag. The tunnel walls were lined with dirt and jagged roots, the kind that would scrape you raw if you moved too fast. My boots scraped against something metallic. A ladder bolted into the earth. It groaned under my weight as I began to descend. "Keep the flashlight steady," Kyle said, crouched at the edge of the trapdoor. Yeah, I grumbled. The farther down I went, the quieter it got. It was like the world above didn't exist anymore. My breath sounded too loud in my ears, each exhale bouncing off the walls and coming back at me. The ladder stretched deeper than I'd expected. 10 feet, then 20. "Jake!" Kyle's voice floated down from above, muffled. "You see anything yet?" "No," I called back, my voice reverberating in the tight space. "Just something moved below me." The flashlight beam flickered as I jerked it downward. The bottom of the tunnel was just a few rungs away now, opening into what looked like a small underground room. My light danced over the dirt floor, the walls, the uneven ground, and then it caught on something shiny. It was a piece of metal, jagged and half buried in the dirt. No, not just one piece. There were dozens of them scattered across the floor, glinting like teeth in the flashlight's glare. I leaned closer, squinting, and realized they weren't random scraps. They were tools. Old ones. Rusted sickles, broken saw blades, even a few pitchforks with the handles snapped clean off. What the hell was this place? I jumped off the ladder and scanned the room. The ceiling was low, barely high enough for me to stand. Roots dangled like skeletal fingers, and the dirt walls were scrawled with strange marks. Not writing exactly, but symbols. Spirals, jagged lines, shapes that didn't make any sense. Jake! Kyle's voice was barely audible now. What's down there? Some kind of tool shed? I called back, though that didn't feel right. As I turned, my light landed on something against the far wall. Bones. I froze. They weren't scattered like animal remains. They were stacked neatly, almost ritualistically. A pile of ribs, femurs, skulls, all bleached white and carefully arranged in a way that made my stomach churn. Jake, talk to me. Kyle sounded panicked now. There are bones down here, I said, my voice hoarse. And tools. And something else. Because that's when I noticed it. The ground wasn't solid. Pulsed. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the flashlight, but then I saw it again. The dirt rippling ever so slightly, like something was breathing beneath it. Get out of there! Kyle screamed. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned toward the ladder, but before I could take a step, a sound erupted from the walls. A scratching. It was faint at first, like nails scraping against wood, but it grew louder, closer. It was coming from behind the walls, beneath the floor, all around me. I aimed the flashlight wildly, the beam catching the rippling dirt, the shifting shadows, the marks on the walls that now seemed to writhe as if alive. And then it came. The dirt near the bones cracked open, and something began to crawl out. At first, it was just a claw, a long, skeletal thing coated in mud and muck, its joints bending backward like a spider's leg. Then came another and another until an entire arm emerged. The bones were jagged, covered in black slime that dripped onto the floor. Jake! Kyle shouted. Climb! Now! I scrambled for the ladder as the thing began to pull itself free. I didn't wait to see its face. All I could hear was the sound. The squelching, wet noise of something ancient dragging itself out of the earth. The ladder creaked and swayed as I climbed, my hands slipping on the damp rungs. I could hear the thing below me now, its claws scraping against the walls, the wet slapping of its limbs as it chased me up the tunnel. Kyle grabbed my arm as soon as I reached the top and hauled me out. What the hell was that? I shouted, slamming the trapdoor shut. Kyle didn't answer. He just stared at the door, his face pale. And then we both heard it. The scratching, faint but unmistakable, coming from beneath the floorboards of the shed. Is it trying to get out? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Kyle looked at me, his eyes wide and haunted. It already has, he said. We didn't wait around to see if the trapdoor would hold. Kyle and I bolted from the shed, slamming the door behind us as if that would do anything to stop whatever that thing was. We sprinted toward the house, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand, casting jagged shadows across the fields. What the hell is down there, Kyle? I gasped as we reached his back porch. I don't know, he shouted back, fumbling with the screen door. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely grip the handle. I've been hearing things at night, scratching, thumping. I thought it was raccoons or coyotes, but then I found the trapdoor last week. And he didn't finish. He didn't have to. Once we were inside, Kyle locked every door and window he could find. He even slid the old oak dining table in front of the back door, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. Meanwhile, I was pacing in the kitchen, my heart pounding, my hands still shaking. That thing, it's alive, I said. I saw it, Kyle. It's not human, it's not natural. Kyle nodded, his face pale and sweat slick. I know. What do you mean? You know? He hesitated, then walked over to the kitchen counter and grabbed a bottle of whiskey. He took a long swig before answering. I've been doing some research, he said finally, his voice low, about the farm, about This land. I stared at him. What are you talking about? Kyle set the bottle down and looked at me, his eyes hollow. This land, it wasn't always farmland. Before my family bought it, back in the 1800s, it was owned by this group of settlers. They built a little community here, but they weren't normal settlers, Jake. They were different. Religious, maybe, but not in the way you're thinking. What do you mean? They worshipped something they called the Hollow One. There's barely any record of them, but I found a few mentions online. They believed this land was sacred, a place where the veil was thinner. They thought they could communicate with something on the other side. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. You're saying that thing down there is what? A god? Kyle shook his head. Not a god, more like a guardian or a prisoner. They built the shed to keep it contained. But over time, people forgot. My family bought the farm, tore down the old buildings, planted crops. That thing, whatever it is, stayed buried. Until now. We both went silent. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. It sounded insane, but after what I'd seen in that tunnel, a loud bang interrupted my thoughts. We both froze, staring at the back door. Bang. Came again, louder this time. Something was pounding against the door, hard enough to make the table in front of it tremble. Kyle, I whispered. He didn't respond. He was staring at the door, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. Bang. The door frame creaked, and I realized with a sinking feeling that whatever was out there wasn't going to stop. We need to go, I said, grabbing his arm. Go where? He whispered. If it's out, it'll find us no matter where we go. Crack. The top corner of the door splintered, and through the gap, I saw it. A clawed hand, bone-white and dripping with black slime, curling around the edge of the doorframe. Move! I shouted, yanking Kyle toward the front of the house. We bolted down the hallway, the walls vibrating with the sound of wood splintering behind us. Kyle tripped over the rug in the living room, crashing to the floor, but I dragged him to his feet. Truck! I shouted. We'll take my truck. We tore out the front door, not daring to look back. The night was pitch black, the only light coming from the stars and the dim glow of the porch light. My truck was parked a few yards away, and I could already hear the sound of something scraping against the side of the house, something heavy and wet slapping against the ground as it followed us. I fumbled with my keys, my hands slick with sweat. Finally, the door unlocked, and we scrambled inside. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. Nothing. Come on. I hissed, trying again. Still nothing. Jake! Kyle screamed, pointing out the windshield. I looked up and my blood ran cold. The thing was standing in the yard, illuminated by the porch light. It was tall, unnaturally so, its spindly limbs too long, its body hunched like a spider. Its skin was a sickly, translucent white, and its face, if you could call it a face, was a hollow void, an endless blackness that seemed to pull at the edges of reality. It took a step toward us, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by a drunk puppeteer. The truck roared to life. Hang on! I shouted, slamming my foot on the gas. The tires squealed as we tore out of the driveway, the thing lunging after us. I caught one last glimpse of it in the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, its head tilted at an impossible angle, watching us. I kept the pedal floored, the truck bouncing and jolting over the uneven dirt road leading away from Kyle's farm. The headlights barely cut through the thick darkness, casting eerie shadows over the tall cornfields lining either side. My hands were locked in a death grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Beside me, Kyle was shaking so bad I thought he might pass out. His eyes darted between the side mirrors and the rear view, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Do you see it? I asked, my voice tight. Kyle didn't answer. He just kept staring out the window, his face pale and drenched with sweat. I glanced in the mirror. The road behind us was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being followed. The way that thing had moved, the way it had looked, it wasn't something that could be outrun. We need to get to town, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Find the sheriff. Someone. Kyle finally snapped out of his daze. The sheriff? He said, his voice rising. What the hell is he gonna do? Arrest it? You saw that thing, Jake. It's not. Something slammed into the side of the truck, hard enough to make us swerve. Shit, I shouted, fighting to keep the truck on the road. Kyle screamed, pointing to his side of the cab. It's here. It's right here. I didn't want to look. I really didn't, but I did anyway. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of pale, bony limbs scrambling alongside the truck, keeping pace despite the speed. The thing's head was low, almost touching the ground, but its hollow face was tilted up toward us, like it was watching. I slammed the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt, kicking up a cloud of dirt and gravel. The thing shot past us, its limbs twisting and bending as it tumbled into the cornfield. For a moment, everything went quiet except for the sound of the truck's engine rumbling and our panicked breathing. Did we lose it? Kyle whispered. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My eyes were glued to the cornfield ahead, where the stalks were swaying. Too much, too fast. Something was moving in there. And then the sound started. It was low at first, barely audible over the engine. A deep, guttural clicking noise, like bones snapping and grinding together. It grew louder, more erratic, until it filled the air around us. Go, Kyle said, his voice trembling. Just go. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the gas pedal, the tires spinning for a second before the truck lurched forward. We barreled down the dirt road, the sound of clicking and scraping fading into the distance behind us. But it wasn't gone. The air inside the truck felt heavier, like the thing was still with us somehow, watching, waiting. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the fields blurring into a sea of darkness. My phone had no signal, the GPS was useless, and I couldn't even tell if we were headed toward town anymore. Jake, Kyle said, his voice low. What? I snapped, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Look. I followed his gaze out the windshield and my stomach dropped. We were back at the farm. The truck was idling in the middle of the driveway. The headlights pointed straight at the north shed. No, I whispered, shaking my head. That's not possible. We didn't turn around. We didn't. Kyle grabbed my arm. We need to get out of here, right now. Before I could respond, the shed door creaked open. It wasn't a normal creak. It was slow, deliberate, like someone or something wanted us to know they were there. The flashlight from earlier was still lying in the grass where I'd dropped it, its beam illuminating the trapdoor, which was now wide open. The clicking noise started again, louder this time, echoing out of the tunnel like a chorus of snapping jaws. We can't stay here, Kyle said, his voice barely audible. I threw the truck into reverse, but the tires spun uselessly, kicking up dirt. What the hell? I shouted, slamming the gas again. The truck didn't move. It was like something was holding it in place. Kyle's door suddenly flew open, and before I could react, he was yanked out. Kyle! I screamed, scrambling to undo my seatbelt. I jumped out of the truck, my boots crunching against the gravel. Kyle was on the ground, being dragged toward the shed by, I don't even know what. The shadows around him twisted and writhed, taking shapes that didn't make any sense. Long, skeletal limbs, gaping maws, hollow faces. I ran toward him, grabbing his arm and pulling as hard as I could. Let go of me, Kyle screamed, his voice raw with terror. I'm not letting go, I shouted back, my feet slipping on the loose gravel. The shadows seemed to hiss, their grip tightening around Kyle's legs. The clicking noise was deafening now, filling my ears and rattling my skull. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The shadows retreated, slithering back into the shed like a tide rolling out. Kyle lay on the ground, gasping for air, his face pale and streaked with tears. Jake, he whispered, his voice shaking. It let me go. I looked at him, then back at the shed. The trapdoor was closed again, and the night was eerily quiet. We're leaving, I said, hauling him to his feet. We didn't speak as we climbed back into the truck. This time it started without issue, and we drove away, leaving the farm behind. But as we hit the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. The shed was gone. In its place was a hole. A massive, gaping hole, its edges lined with jagged, teeth-like rocks, leading straight into the earth. And standing at the edge, barely visible in the moonlight, was the thing, watching us, waiting. We didn't stop driving until the sun broke over the horizon. Kyle was slumped in the passenger seat, silent and pale, his knees pulled to his chest. I wasn't much better. My hands were locked on the wheel, my fingers numb, my head spinning with everything we'd seen. The road was deserted, just stretches of empty fields and power lines that blurred together like a fever dream. "We need to tell someone," I said finally, my voice hoarse from hours of silence. Kyle didn't respond. He just stared out the window, his breath fogging the glass. "Kyle," I said louder this time, "what are we gonna tell them?" He snapped, turning to me with bloodshot eyes. "That there's some thing living under my farm? That we saw shadows drag me across the dirt? Who's gonna believe that, Jake?" He wasn't wrong. Hell, I didn't even believe it, and I'd been there. But still, we couldn't just stop the truck, Kyle said suddenly. "What? Stop the truck?" he shouted, his voice cracking. I slammed the brakes, the tires squealing as we skidded to a stop on the side of the road. Kyle threw open the door and stumbled out, dropping to his knees in the dirt. I killed the engine and followed him, my boots crunching on the gravel. "Kyle, what the hell are you doing?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the road ahead, his face ashen. I turned to look, and my stomach dropped. We were back at the farm. The truck was parked at the edge of the driveway, the house and silos looming in the distance like they'd been waiting for us. The hole in the earth was still there, gaping and unnatural, the jagged rocks around its edges glistening in the early morning light. "This isn't possible," I whispered, taking a step back. Kyle stood slowly, his legs trembling. "It won't let us leave," he said, his voice hollow. "No matter how far we drive, no matter how fast we go, it's pulling us back." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the evidence was staring us in the face. "What do we do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Kyle didn't respond right away. He just stared at the hole, his jaw clenched, his fists tight at his sides. "We end it," he said finally. "What?" "We end it, Jake. Whatever's down there, whatever's been waiting all this time, it's awake now, and it's not going to stop. Not until it gets what it wants." "And what does it want?" I asked, my voice rising. Kyle turned to me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Us. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have weapons. All we had was the truck and a flashlight and a sick, gut-wrenching feeling that this was the only way out." The hole seemed even bigger now, like it had grown overnight. The air around it was heavy, thick with a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. The clicking noise had started again, faint but insistent, like it was calling us. Kyle grabbed a crowbar from the bed of the truck, his hands shaking. "If it comes to it," he said, "don't let it take me." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. We approached the edge slowly, the ground beneath our feet feeling softer, looser, as if the earth itself was unsteady. I shone the flashlight into the hole, but the beam disappeared into the blackness, swallowed whole. "Hello," Kyle called, his voice cracking. The clicking stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the ground beneath us trembled, and a sound erupted from the hole. A deep, guttural roar that shook the air and sent chills down my spine. And then it began to crawl out. This time it wasn't just a claw or an arm. It was the whole thing, the hollow one. Its body was massive, too big for the hole it emerged from, its limbs stretching unnaturally as it pulled itself into the light. Its skin was a sickly, translucent white, and its face, if you could even call it that, was a void, an empty blackness that seemed to suck the air from my lungs. It didn't move like a living thing. It twitched and jerked, its limbs bending at impossible angles, its head tilting back and forth as if it were sniffing the air. Kyle screamed and swung the crowbar, but the thing didn't even flinch. It just kept coming, its hollow face turning toward him, its limbs scraping against the dirt as it advanced. Run! I shouted, grabbing Kyle's arm and pulling him back. We stumbled toward the truck, but the ground beneath us buckled, and we both went down hard. The hollow one was faster than it should have been, its limbs snapping forward, its void-like face just inches from Kyle. No! I screamed, scrambling to my feet and grabbing the flashlight. I didn't know what I was doing, but I swung it as hard as I could, the beam of light slicing through the shadows. The hollow one recoiled, its body twisting violently, its limbs clawing at the air. "It doesn't like the light," Kyle shouted. That was all I needed to hear. I turned the flashlight on full blast, aiming it directly at the thing's face. It let out a screeching noise, high-pitched and ear-splitting, before retreating, its body jerking back into the hole. The ground trembled again, the edges of the hole collapsing inward, the rocks and dirt caving in on themselves. We didn't stick around to see what happened next. We made it to the main road, and this time the farm didn't follow us. We didn't talk on the drive back to town. There was nothing to say. Kyle sold the farm a week later, though I don't know who would want it. As far as I know, no one's been back there since. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it, the faint sound of clicking like bones snapping and grinding together. And I know it's still out there, waiting. It's been 3 years since that night, but not a single day goes by where I don't think about it. The farm, the hole, the hollow one. Kyle left town shortly after selling the property. He said he needed a fresh start, a new place where he wouldn't be haunted by the memories. I can't blame him. I've thought about leaving too, but something keeps me rooted here. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's because deep down I know it's not over. For a while, things seemed normal. The farm sat abandoned, overgrown with weeds and sagging under the weight of time. No one wanted to touch it, not even the county. There were rumors. Kids daring each other to spend the night there. Locals swearing they saw strange lights above the fields. But nothing concrete. Just whispers. Until 2 weeks ago. It started with a news report. A local man had gone missing while hiking in the woods near the old farm. Search parties combed the area but found nothing. No tracks. No signs of a struggle. Just his truck parked at the edge of the property. The sheriff chalked it up to an animal attack, maybe a bear or a cougar, but I knew better. Then, a week later, a couple driving through town reported seeing something on the road near the farm. They described it as tall and pale, with limbs that didn't move right. The police dismissed it as a prank, some kids trying to stir up old ghost stories. But the description made my blood run cold. It was back. Last night, I got a call from Kyle. I hadn't heard from him since he left town, and honestly, I wasn't sure I ever would. But when I saw his name on my phone, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Jake," he said, his voice trembling. "It's happening again." "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I already knew. "The clicking," he said. "It's back. I hear it at night, outside my window. I thought I left it behind, but it followed me." My heart sank. I didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone when you're just as terrified as they are? "Kyle," I said finally, "you need to leave. Get as far away as you can." "I've tried," he said, his voice breaking. "It doesn't matter where I go. It finds me." There was a long pause, and then he said something that sent a chill through me. "You remember what it said?" I froze. What said?" Kyle took a shaky breath. "The hollow one. When it was pulling me into the hole, I heard it. Not with my ears, but in my head. Spoke to me, Jake. Said, 'You brought me out. You belong to me now.' I didn't sleep last night. Couldn't. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the windows sent my nerves into overdrive. I kept expecting to hear it. The clicking, the scratching, the sound of something clawing its way back into my life. And now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that it's only a matter of time. Kyle was right. We let it out. And it's not going to stop until it takes us back. This is where I need to make a decision. Do I run? Do I fight? Or do I do nothing and wait for it to come for me like it came for Kyle? The truth is, I don't know if it even matters. Because no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I can feel it watching. And if you're reading this, be careful, because once you've heard the clicking, it's already too late. I thought writing it down would help. Like getting it out of my head might loosen its grip. Let me breathe again. But it hasn't. In fact, I think it's made things worse. Because last night I heard it. Started around 2 a.m. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that the strange shadows creeping across my walls were just tricks of the streetlights outside. That's when I heard it, the first click. It was faint, almost like the sound of two rocks tapping together. At first, I told myself it was the old pipes in the house settling, or maybe the branches of the oak tree scraping against the siding. But then it came again, louder this time. Click, click, click. My chest tightened. It was unmistakable. The same sound we'd heard in the tunnel, the same sound that had followed us all the way back to the truck. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound was coming from inside the house. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. There was no signal, of course there wasn't. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't play by the rules. Click, click, click. It was closer now. I swung my legs off the bed and grabbed the baseball bat I kept leaned against the nightstand. Not that it would do me any good, but it felt better to hold on to something solid. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. Just the clicking, now accompanied by a faint scraping sound, like nails on wood. It was coming from the living room. I crept down the hallway, every floorboard creaking under my weight. The clicking grew louder with each step, echoing in the dark like a countdown. My flashlight was in my hand, but I hadn't turned it on yet. I wasn't sure I wanted to see whatever was waiting for me. When I reached the living room, I stopped. The sound had stopped too. I held my breath, listening, my eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. Everything looked normal, the couch, the coffee table, the bookshelves. Nothing out of place. And then I saw it. The front door was open. Not wide open, but just enough to let the cold night air seep in. Enough to make me realize that whatever was in the house hadn't come in. It was letting me out. I should have stayed inside. I know that now, but something about that open door pulled at me, like a hook lodged deep in my brain. I stepped outside, barefoot on the cold porch, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The yard was still, the moonlight casting long, skeletal shadows across the grass. The oak tree swayed gently in the breeze, its branches reaching toward the house like claws. And then I saw them. Footprints. They started at the base of the porch stairs and led across the yard, disappearing into the woods beyond. They weren't normal footprints, though. They were long, with too many toes, the edges blurred as if whatever made them wasn't entirely solid. I don't know what possessed me to follow them. Maybe I thought if I confronted it, I could end this once and for all. Or maybe it wasn't my choice at all. Maybe it wanted me to follow. The woods were darker than they should have been. Even with the flashlight, I could barely see a few feet ahead. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches tangling above like a web. The footprints were still there, etched into the soft earth, leading me deeper and deeper into the forest. The clicking started again, fainter now, as if it were coming from far away or everywhere at once. And then I saw the light. It was faint, a dull, pulsing glow filtering through the trees. It wasn't warm like a fire or cold like the moon. It was wrong. The footprints led straight to it. When I reached the clearing, I froze. The light was coming from a hole in the ground, a perfect circle carved into the earth, too clean, too precise. It wasn't like the hole at the farm. This one was smaller, more controlled, but it had the same sense of hunger. And standing at the edge of it, silhouetted by the light, was Kyle. "Kyle?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't turn around. "Kyle, what the hell are you doing out here?" Still nothing. I took a step closer, the beam of my flashlight catching his profile. His face was pale, his eyes wide and empty, staring into the light as if it were pulling him in. "Kyle!" I shouted. This time he turned. But it wasn't Kyle. Not anymore. His face was wrong, too smooth, his features stretched and hollow. His mouth opened, but the sound that came out wasn't human. Click, click, click. I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the ground. The light went out, plunging the clearing into darkness. And then I heard it, the sound of something crawling out of the hole. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't try to grab the flashlight, didn't even think about where I was going. I just ran, my breath tearing through my throat, the sound of clicking and scraping and snapping bones echoing behind me. The trees blurred past me, their branches clawing at my skin, but I didn't stop, couldn't. When I finally burst out of the woods and into my yard, the first rays of sunlight were breaking over the horizon. The house looked exactly as I'd left it, the front door still ajar, the baseball bat lying on the porch. But I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it. Whatever I'd seen in the clearing, whatever had come out of that hole, it wasn't just coming for me. It was coming for all of us. I didn't sleep for days after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kyle, or whatever was wearing his face, standing at the edge of that glowing hole. I could still hear the clicking, faint but insistent, like a countdown ticking away in the back of my mind. I thought about leaving town, packing up and driving until I hit the coast, somewhere far away from the farm, the woods, the hollow one. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't bound by roads or borders. It wasn't something I could outrun. And then the reports started. It began in the next county over, a quiet little town like mine where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. 3 hikers went missing in the woods, their campsite found abandoned, the tents shredded like paper. A farmer found their dog wandering in a field, trembling and covered in deep, jagged scratches. Then, 2 days later, a woman swore she saw her husband standing in their backyard at 3 a.m., the same husband who died in a car crash 6 months ago. She said he called her name. She said he was smiling. She said his mouth didn't move right. By the time the authorities arrived, the woman was gone, the yard empty except for a trail of footprints leading into the woods. I stopped checking the news after that. I didn't need to. The signs were everywhere. People started whispering about strange shapes in the fields at night, figures that didn't walk but crawled, their limbs too long and their joints bending the wrong way. There were rumors of lights in the woods, glowing orbs that hovered just above the ground, pulsing like heartbeats. And then there was the sound. At first, it was only late at night, faint and distant, like the creak of old trees swaying in the wind. But soon it grew louder, closer, until it was impossible to ignore. Click, click, click. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the baseball bat and my flashlight and stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air prickling my skin. The yard was silent, the only movement coming from the swaying oak tree. But the air felt heavy, thick with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. "I know you're out there," I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The only answer was the clicking, louder now, echoing from the woods. I aimed the flashlight at the tree line, the beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw something move, a shadow slipping between the trunks, its outline distorted and wrong. And then I saw the light. It was faint, a dull glow filtering through the trees, just like before. But this time it wasn't alone. There were 3 lights. They hovered in the darkness, shifting and pulsing, their glow casting strange, twisting shadows across the ground. And then they began to move. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking in my hand as the lights drew closer. They didn't move like anything natural, no sway, no hesitation, just a slow, deliberate glide that made my skin crawl. Behind them, the shadows shifted, taking shape. I saw arms, legs, faces, dozens of them, all wrong, all hollow. And then, through the clicking, I heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the night like a knife, deep and guttural and filled with something ancient. "You belong to us." My breath caught in my throat. The flashlight slipped from my hand, hitting the ground with a dull thud. And then they stopped. The lights hung just at the edge of the yard, their glow reflecting off the windows of the house. The shadows lingered behind them, watching, waiting. And then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. The lights blinked out. The clicking stopped. I was alone again, but it wasn't over. The next morning, I found the footprints. They were everywhere, circling the house, leading to the porch, even pressed into the dirt just outside my bedroom window. And in the middle of the yard, carved into the earth, was a symbol, a spiral. I don't know what it means, but I can feel it. In my bones, in my blood, in the hollow space where fear has taken root. It's spreading, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. I thought the footprints, the lights, the clicking, it was all leading up to something. But the silence that followed was worse. Days passed without incident, and I started to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, it was over. I should have known better. It's not over. It was never over. 3 nights ago, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was nearly 3 a.m., and the name on the screen made my stomach drop. Kyle. I hadn't heard from him since that last, desperate phone call weeks ago. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. Kyle? I said, my voice shaky. There was nothing but static on the other end. Faint, crackling, and distorted. And then, through the static, I heard it, the clicking. Jake? Kyle's voice came through, faint and warped, like it was coming from somewhere far away. You have to come back. It's awake. What's awake? I demanded, my voice rising. But the line went dead. I told myself not to go. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, to stay far, far away from the farm and whatever nightmare was buried beneath it. But Kyle sounded terrified, and if there was even a chance I could help him, I had to try. So I packed a bag, flashlights, batteries, the baseball bat, anything I thought might give me an edge, and drove straight back to the farm. When I pulled into the driveway, I almost turned around and left. The house was dark, the windows empty and lifeless. The weeds in the yard had grown tall, swaying in the night breeze like grasping fingers. And in the middle of it all, the hole was back. I killed the engine and stepped out of the truck, my flashlight cutting through the dark. The spiral was carved into the ground around the hole now, deep and jagged, like something had clawed it into the earth. Kyle! I shouted, my voice echoing across the empty fields. There was no response. I edged closer to the hole, every step feeling heavier than the last. The air around it was thick, humming with a low vibration that made my teeth ache. And then I saw him. Kyle was standing at the edge of the hole, staring down into the blackness. His clothes were torn and filthy, his hair matted with dirt. Kyle! I called again, running toward him. He didn't move. When I reached him, I grabbed his shoulder, shaking him hard. What are you doing? We need to get out of here. He turned slowly, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette on tangled strings. And then I saw his face. It wasn't Kyle. Not really. His eyes were empty voids, black and endless. His mouth twisted into a smile, too wide. His lips splitting as if his skin didn't quite fit anymore. It's calling, he said, his voice layered with something guttural and alien. It's time to go back. I stumbled away, my flashlight shaking in my hands. Kyle, or whatever was wearing his body, took a step toward me, his limbs bending at impossible angles. You brought it out, he said, his voice echoing in the night. Now you have to go in. Behind him, the hole began to glow, a sickly yellow light pulsing from its depths. The air grew hotter, heavier, the hum turning into a deafening roar. And then I saw it, the hollow one. It was climbing out of the hole, its limbs impossibly long, its void-like face staring straight at me. The glow from the hole illuminated its body, twisting, translucent, shifting like smoke trapped in glass. You belong to us, it said, the words vibrating through my skull. Kyle lunged at me, but I swung the flashlight, the beam catching him in the face. He recoiled with an inhuman screech, collapsing to the ground. But the hollow one kept coming. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, the flashlight trembling in my hands. The light didn't seem to bother it anymore. It was bigger now, stronger. Stay back, I shouted, though my voice was drowned out by the roar of the hole. The ground beneath me began to crack, splitting open like dry skin. I could feel the pull of the hole, a force dragging me toward it, tugging at my limbs, my mind, my very soul. No! I screamed, digging my heels into the dirt. But the hollow one reached for me, its skeletal limbs stretching, its hollow face inches from mine. And then, out of nowhere, there was a flash of light. The beam hit the hollow one square in the chest, and it recoiled, its limbs twitching and jerking. I turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the field, holding a massive floodlight. "Run!" they shouted. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the truck, the ground shaking beneath me as the hollow one let out an ear-splitting screech. I didn't look back. By the time I hit the main road, the farm was out of sight, the roar of the hole fading into silence. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I don't know who that person was or why they were there, but I owe them my life. And Kyle? I don't think he's Kyle anymore. It's been 2 days since I left the farm, and the clicking hasn't stopped. It's louder now, closer. I think it's only a matter of time before the hollow one finds me again. Because I didn't just see it, I felt it. And now I think it's inside me. The clicking is constant now. It's not just in the quiet moments, when I'm alone in my house or driving down an empty road. It's everywhere. It's in the hum of the fridge, the tapping of rain against the window, even in the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of my own heartbeat. I don't know where Kyle is. I don't know if he's still wandering near the farm or if the hollow one dragged him fully into whatever place it calls home. But every time I hear that clicking, I feel it creeping closer, inside me. Last night, I blacked out. I was sitting in the kitchen, trying to drown the sound out with music blasting through my headphones, when I felt it. A pressure in my head, like my thoughts weren't my own anymore. I blinked, and when my vision cleared, I was standing in my backyard, barefoot in the cold mud. My hands were shaking, my clothes drenched in sweat, but I don't remember walking out there. And there, in the soft dirt, I saw them. Footprints. My own. They led from the back door to the edge of the woods, stopping in front of the oak tree. Carved into the bark of the tree was the spiral. I don't know how much time I have left. This thing, the hollow one, it's not just chasing me. It's burrowing into me, unspooling its threads into my mind. I see it in the corners of my vision, shadows twisting into impossible shapes. I feel it in my chest, the hollow ache growing stronger with every passing hour. And now, I think it's trying to turn me into one of them. It happened again this morning. I woke up with dirt under my fingernails and scratches on my arms. The spiral was drawn on my bedroom wall, etched into the plaster like it had been clawed there. I grabbed the bat and the flashlight, ready to smash it to pieces, but when I looked closer, I saw the lines weren't random. They were letters, words. Bring them back. I don't know what it means. I don't know who they are or what the hollow one wants from me, but I can feel it pushing me, pulling me towards something I can't explain. Maybe that's why I'm writing this. Maybe I think if I tell the story, if I pass it on, it'll leave me alone. Or maybe that's just what it wants me to believe. Tonight, I'm going back to the farm. Not because I want to, but because I don't think I have a choice anymore. The clicking is louder than ever, pounding in my ears, rattling through my skull. Every part of me is screaming to run, to hide, but I know it won't help. It never helps. If you're reading this, you need to stay away from the farm. Stay away from the woods, the holes, the spirals, and whatever you do, don't listen to the clicking. Because once you hear it, once it finds its way inside you, it doesn't let go. I can see the lights outside now, glowing faintly at the edge of the yard. It's calling me, and this time I don't think I'll come back. If you're reading this, then I need you to understand something. It's not just me. It's never been just me. I woke up this morning in my truck. I don't remember driving anywhere, but the engine was still warm, the headlights casting long beams across an unfamiliar stretch of road. My hands were stiff, caked with dried mud, and my legs ached like I'd been running for miles. But the strangest thing? The passenger seat wasn't empty. At first, I thought it was Kyle. The shape slumped against the seat, the faint glow of the dashboard illuminating a pale face turned toward the window. But when I called his name, it didn't respond. And then I realized it wasn't Kyle. His face wasn't a face at all. Just smooth, featureless skin stretched over a hollow skull. Its head twitched once, then slowly turned toward me, its empty, eyeless sockets staring straight into mine. Bring them back. The voice came from nowhere, echoing inside my head, vibrating through my bones. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away from that endless void where its eyes should have been. And then it was gone. I don't know how I got back to my house. All I remember is stumbling through the front door, locking it behind me, and collapsing onto the floor. The spiral was waiting for me, carved into the living room wall, bigger and deeper than before. I don't know how it got there. I don't want to know. But this time, the words inside it were different. You opened the door. I don't know what door it's talking about. I don't remember opening anything. But maybe that's the point. Maybe I didn't have to, because whatever's happening now is bigger than me. The news reports are everywhere now, but no one's putting the pieces together. A man in a neighboring town vanished while walking his dog. The dog was found 2 days later, scratching at the door of a house with spirals painted across every wall. A family woke up to find their youngest son standing in the yard, staring into the woods. He didn't speak for 3 days, and when he finally did, all he said was, "They're here." And in the next county over, a group of teenagers went camping near an old, abandoned farm. They never came back. I saw one of them yesterday. Not the hollow one, but something like it. A shape moving through the trees at the edge of town, tall and pale, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. It wasn't alone. Behind it, I saw more shapes, dozens of them, flickering in and out of sight like shadows in the corner of my vision. And the clicking, it's louder than ever now. I think it's spreading. I don't know how or why, but the hollow one isn't just a thing anymore. It's a presence, a shadow creeping through the cracks of this world, turning people into them. And I think it's my fault. I'm writing this now because I don't know how much longer I'll be myself. The spiral isn't just on the walls anymore. It's in my mind, spinning and spinning, drawing me deeper into something I can't escape. Every time I close my eyes, I see the hole. I feel the pull of it, the hunger, the emptiness waiting at the center. And I know, deep down, that it's waiting for me. If you've read this far, then I need you to do one thing. Don't let it pull you in. Don't listen to the clicking, don't follow the lights, and whatever you do, don't let the spiral into your mind. Because once it gets in, once you hear it, once you see it, there's no coming back. The lights are outside again, closer this time. I can see the shadows moving through the trees, their hollow faces watching, waiting. I can hear the clicking in the walls, in my chest, in my skull. It's time. They're coming. And I think this time, they're not just coming for me. I don't have much time. I can feel it now, deep inside me, twisting like roots burrowing through my veins. The clicking isn't just a sound anymore. It's part of me. Every beat of my heart, every twitch of my muscles, every breath I take. It's all hollow. The lights are outside again, brighter than ever. They're no longer waiting at the edge of the yard. They're here, surrounding the house, pulsing like some alien heartbeat. The shadows move with them, gliding across the windows, their shapes flickering and contorting in ways that shouldn't be possible. And the spiral? It's everywhere, not just on the walls, but burned into my mind. It spins constantly, faster and faster, dragging me toward a center I can't escape. I think that's the door, the one I opened, the one they're coming through. I finally understand now. The hollow one isn't just a thing. It's not some creature hiding in a hole or a shadow lurking in the woods. It's more than that. It's ancient, endless. A hunger that spreads like a sickness, devouring everything it touches. And the worst part? It doesn't want to kill us. It wants to make us part of it. That's what the spiral does. Pulls you in, hollowing you out, twisting you into something new, something wrong. I've seen what happens to the ones who give in. Kyle, the hikers, the family, all of them pulled into the spiral, stripped of everything that made them human. And now it's my turn. The door won't hold much longer. I can hear the clicking inside the house now, louder than ever. The lights seep through the cracks, casting strange, shifting patterns across the walls. They're not just shadows anymore. They're here. I tried running. I tried fighting, but it doesn't matter. The hollow one always wins. This isn't about survival. It never was. This is about the spiral. It wants to keep spreading. I don't know if anyone will find this, or if it even matters. Maybe by the time you read this, it'll already be too late. Maybe the spiral will have reached you too. But if you're still safe, if you haven't heard the clicking or seen the lights, there's one thing you need to remember. Don't look for it. Don't follow it. Don't let it into your mind. Because once the spiral takes root, there's no escape. The lights are in the room now. The shadows are moving closer. Their hollow faces turning toward me. Their arms outstretched. And in the center of it all, I see it. The hollow one is beautiful. The spiral spins faster and faster, pulling me in, filling me with its light. I thought I'd be afraid, but I'm not, because now I understand. The hollow one isn't taking me. It's becoming me.